So the talks focus on one very particular subject. Everything that is spoken about in the talks is relevant to this one particular subject. And that subject is happiness for the human being in daily life. And the content of the talk is very specific, well thought out. The words that are used are not used willy-nilly. And so if we're going to make this distinction that everything in the talk is specifically about one thing, happiness for the human in daily living, we should make it clear what that happiness is. Happiness turns out to be continuous, unbroken peace of mind, regardless of the circumstance that we find ourselves in. Happiness is not the gaining of something, not a feeling, not excitement or joy. That's what happiness has been assumed to be. So human beings seem to be designed to assume that happiness is something that it isn't, and seek after what they assume happiness is. So the movement is a movement towards happiness through outcomes, happiness through pleasure. Because that's what happiness is believed to be. Now, because we believe happiness to be something doesn't actually make it that. Happiness for the human being turns out to be something very specific, something very ordinary and simple, so ordinary and simple that the intellect can't imagine that that is what happiness is. Once again, happiness turns out to be continuous, unbroken peace of mind, regardless of the circumstance that we find ourselves in. And so it makes sense that even though we're looking for happiness, that's what everyone in life is looking for, happiness. If the happiness that we are looking for is some imagined happiness that doesn't exist, then it makes sense that we will spend our whole life looking for this happiness that we think is happiness, a happiness that doesn't actually exist, and die frustrated, live frustrated. So at the beginning of the talks, for very good reason, we say if you find yourself seeking, and seekers know from their own experience or by having interacted with many other seekers, that this seeking can carry on for an extended period of time, sometimes 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Now, one of the reasons I think it carries on for so long is because we don't start where I'm suggesting we start right now. So my point was going to be that if we find ourselves seeking, understanding that sometimes quite a lot of time and effort gets put into seeking, it would make sense to ask this question: what is it that I'm really looking for? What is it that I'm seeking? What is the purpose of all my efforts? And so that is the suggested question that we should be really clear about. If I was ever going to suggest to anyone to write something down in plain sight, maybe in many places around your house, on all of the doors, I would write this, the answer to this question. Now, you have to come up with the answer to the question for yourself, but it doesn't hurt. You're allowed to use guidance. You're allowed to use tips. It's like call a friend on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. You're allowed to use all of the tips. The tips come in the form of wisdom teachings. So, with this very specific question, you have to find the answer out for yourself, but you're allowed to use the tips. Now, that doesn't mean go to a wisdom teaching that gives you an answer that isn't to this question. Because if you get a suggested answer, now what I mean by using the tips is you don't just believe the answer that the teaching is giving, but you say, oh, this is what the teaching is saying the answer is. Now I need to verify it for myself. And the teaching may well give you lots of other tips as to how to verify it, how to check that this is correct. So if we go to a teaching to answer this question, but we go to a teaching that doesn't directly give an answer to this question, then we won't find that particular teaching helpful to answer this question. What am I really looking for? And the suggestion here, when asking this question, is don't just accept a word, because a word like enlightenment, what does it mean in practical terms? So that's the other point. Don't take some theoretical answer, even if you understand what the theoretical answer is talking about. Let's be really practical, because if we look for a practical answer, then we can find out for ourselves, because we can investigate things practically. We can see things for ourselves. Sometimes some of the esoteric answers give us an answer, but it's not something we have any frame of reference for ourselves. So you're looking for union with God. Okay, sounds very good. Now, how do I investigate that? Maybe I need to find God first in order to verify that for myself. So if we look at things practically, which means, if the answer involves things like check under the table, and the answer will be there, then we can actually look under the table. If it says, oh, the answer is behind the stone on the moon, at some position on the moon, well, we can't really verify that for ourselves. So if we keep it practical, we can. Okay, the suggested answer is all humans are looking for happiness, whether we realize it or not. That's what everyone is looking for. As I started off suggesting, humans have been looking for happiness in the wrong place. The belief, the deeply ingrained belief, which is driving us without us even necessarily knowing that this is the case. So we might not even know we're looking for happiness. The deeply ingrained belief says my happiness is to be found in outcomes. And so we wake up in the morning trying to control life such that the outcomes that we think will make us happy happen. We try to control life so that the outcomes that we think will make us happen. Thinking that we can control life. Thinking that we can make the outcomes happen. Even if we could control life, even if we could make the outcomes that we are looking for, the pleasure that we're looking for, if we could make that happen, we would find that it doesn't deliver the happiness we think it is going to deliver. So, how do we verify this for ourselves? That what I'm looking for is happiness, and that the happiness I deeply believe I will find is a happiness through outcomes. The answer is we just need to observe our movements in life. And then we need to observe our reactions when the outcomes we're trying to get in life are not delivered. And that will tell us wow, my reaction, my attitudinal reaction, because the biological reaction to, for example, something falling on our foot, which is pain in the moment, not an outcome we're looking for, the biological reaction of the body moving away from that pain or shouting at the pain, that's biological. That doesn't prove that we believe that our happiness is to be found in that outcome being present or absent. However, our attitudinal reaction does show us what we believe. And when pain is delivered, there is a biological reaction. That's normal. And if we look at our attitudinal reaction, we'll find that the feeling inside is a feeling that tells us that what I am has been attacked by the outcome being out of line with what we are expecting. So if we start to investigate our own life experience for ourselves, and we keep it practical, which means let me drop all of my beliefs for a little bit, because it's most likely that someone who has been seeking happiness and found themselves as a spiritual seeker now believes that they are looking for truth or oneness or enlightenment. It's almost guaranteed that if I ask someone, what are you really looking for? Depending on the path that they have found themselves on, the answer is, I'm looking for truth. And it's quite possibly a belief. Something that has been heard or read, something that sounds noble, something we've believed, and now automatically to that question, what are you looking for? I'm looking for truth. Why? You're not looking for truth because you think truth will leave you in a state of eternal damnation. Looking for truth because you think you'll find yourself feeling intense physical pain when you get truth, when you find truth. We're looking for truth because we believe that if I find truth, I'll be happy. We're looking for enlightenment because we believe when I'm enlightened, everything will be okay. I'll be happy. We're looking for union with God because we assume that when there is union with God, I'll be happy. We're looking to know ourselves because we believe when we know ourselves, I'll be happy.
So the answer of this question can be changed every moment or every day. Depends if I ask me this question at this moment and what's coming, it's I want to how to do it? To don't be get out of the belief that I am the body.
Mm-hmm.
It could be that.
Well, the answer to the question, we have all sorts of answers to this question. I know that. I'm saying find the right answer based on your own investigation by putting the question forward for yourself. So you say, actually, let me ask myself this question. Let me investigate this question. Let me get an answer I'm completely satisfied with to this question. That's what, so for the last 10 minutes, what I've been talking about is exactly this. We have our own answers about what I'm looking for. Humanity has had their own answers for what they're looking for, and they have driven us in the wrong direction because they are the wrong answer to the question. So I'm saying one of the most important questions we need to consciously ask is, what am I really looking for? Maybe we haven't actually really asked that question and investigated it for ourselves in our whole life. And yet for our whole life we've been seeking happiness. Why have we been seeking happiness where we've been seeking happiness if we haven't even asked this question and put a significant amount of thought into the answer in such a way that we keep it very practical and don't take on any fancy beliefs? So if we ask the question, what am I really looking for? And someone comes along and says, oh, you're looking for union with God. And we say, thank you for that. Great, now I know. I'm looking for union with God. Not a good answer to the question. Really bad way of answering the question. So what's being suggested here is this is one of the most important questions we can ask. And the answer that we end up with needs to be an answer that we come up with for ourselves using very good guidance, because if we try to find it on our own, we may make the same mistakes we normally make. Using very good guidance and putting a lot of effort into asking this question to get a good answer that we are completely satisfied for ourselves. So the answers that we keep coming up with, if we have one answer today and another answer tomorrow and another answer the day after, what does that tell you about those answers? Yeah, yeah. Repeat what you just said.
Not the good one.
Yeah,
but it's not the answer. It's not the answer. It's the question. It could be different for me.
Well, the question is the same. What am I really looking for in life?
I put another question after the first question.
Yeah. So, see, what am I really looking for? That's the same question. If we come up with an answer that keeps changing, it says that we don't really know the answer to that question. And someone might say, yeah, but in one moment I feel like this, in the other moment I feel like that. And that's an indication of what we feel like. The question, this question, what are you really looking for, doesn't have an answer that changes moment by moment. It's not an answer that is, well, what do you feel like in this moment? Because what you feel like in each moment is going to change because it's based on your biological preferences in the moment. So someone would say, in this moment I feel like ice cream. In the next moment I feel like sleeping. In the next moment I feel like a hot shower. That's preferences, biological preferences. This question, what am I really looking for, is what am I really in my life? What am I really looking for? What is this seeking about? The seeking isn't about ice cream this moment and then sleep another moment and hot shower the next moment. This seeking is about something very specific. And so, this discussion is good because it highlights that we haven't really asked this question and put effort into coming up with an answer that we feel completely satisfied. And what's important in coming up with the answer is that it's a practical answer, not some theoretical answer, some philosophy that we've just heard that sounds good. And the same with it even being a theological or a spiritual answer that sounds good but we can't really verify. Let's find a way of finding out really by investigating our own life what we're looking for. And the suggestion here is that we'll find by looking at everything that happens in our life that we're looking for happiness. We don't know that we're looking for, because we say, I'm looking for a new job, I'm looking for a new relationship, and then we say, I'm looking for enlightenment, I'm looking for oneness with God. But we look for all of those things because we actually believe that they will make us happy. And so that part is accurate. We are looking for happiness. And we might not have clicked, oh, I'm looking for financial security because I think that will make me happy. I'm looking for a new partner because I think that will make me happy. And I'm looking for enlightenment when that started because I think that will make me happy. So then we can say, everything I do in life, I do it because I think it will make me happy. Even selfless acts of helping the poor or saving the world, we do it because we believe if I do this, it will make me happy.
But it could be very practically always.
Just hold it to your.
Oh, okay. Could it be very practically in the daily life, not to have a new job or to be happy in relationship, but I see in my daily life how I am not happy.
Mm-hmm.
How my behavior, my action and reaction, in this way I'm not happy. So if I look at this, I can imagine how I can be happy if my behavior is changed.
Mm-hmm.
It could be that.
That could be your answer to happiness.
It could be an answer.
That could be the answer. That could be an answer that you have to what will make me happy.
Yeah.
You've come up with the answer. Improved behavior will make me happy. It's completely the wrong answer, but it's your answer.
Yeah.
This is the point. Is if I ask people, what will make you happy, the list will be completely varied for a whole lot of people. Different people will say different things. And when we look at the answers, we'll find that the answers that have been given about what will make people happy are all circumstantial things, outcomes, pleasure in the flow of life. I would like a new partner, I would like a new car, I would like a new house, I would like new belongings, I would like a new job, I would like a new body, I would like, fancy clothes, I would like a new haircut.
But it's not what I say before. I don't want something coming from outside.
Mm-hmm.
It's more I see from inside how it can be. Yeah, it's the same. Different to be more near the happiness.
Yeah. So give me your answer to what are you looking for?
For example, I know how I can react in the way I react to the outcomes, and when the consequences to be frustrated, to be angry, all that. And I am looking for to not be kept by all that.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel it could give me peace.
So let's look. Before you said you are looking to know that you are not the body.
Yeah.
Now, I guess one of the things is from this. So I have to say that's another wrong answer. Hmm? But the fact that it's a wrong answer, don't feel bad that it's a wrong answer.
No.
I would feel excited that, oh, maybe I realize that I have wrong answers to this question because I haven't asked the question in a way where I'm really interested in the answer. So you might be so the logic you have is, if I know that I'm not the body, then when things happen to the body, they won't bother me. They won't affect me. And so you're looking and you're seeing it's your reaction that is a problem. Now, we can have an error here where we think that if I get angry, that's my unhappiness. And so then we say, in that case, I'm looking for the end of the reaction of anger. Now, anger is a biological reaction. It's always going to be there. And the reason we don't want it is because it's a painful biological reaction. It doesn't feel as good as some of the other biological reactions. And if we think that our happiness is to be found in life being pleasure, 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 we fall into the same trap where we've always been, seeking for life to change on a circumstantial level, thinking that that will be my happiness. So if we become clear, the circumstantial level of life is only ever pleasure or pain. What we're looking for is not a change on the level of pleasure or pain, but we're looking for happiness, which is happiness not through outcomes, which is pleasure or pain, but happiness through peace of mind. And continuous, unbroken peace of mind, regardless of the circumstance. So peace of mind doesn't mean that when someone does something to your property, for example, that you won't get angry. Now, on the surface we think, well, anger and peace of mind are completely opposite. If you have peace of mind, you're not going to get angry. But it's not correct. If someone does something to us biologically, the body is going to have a biological reaction. And that could include anger. So if I come back from the shops with my trolley, come up to my car, and as I approach the car, I notice that my car didn't look like that before I left. I come around the corner and the side of the car is completely smashed. Peace of mind doesn't mean that we would see a car that we know to be my car that looks completely smashed and continue with our movements as if nothing has happened. There's going to be a biological reaction. We might burst out laughing at the fact that my car has been completely wrecked in such a dramatic fashion, and I come along and see it. We could burst out crying. We could swear. All of those are biological reactions which make complete sense. If we were to come along and go, oh, my car has been wiped out, that is a biological reaction. And so that is a calm biological reaction. If we break down crying, we might say that's not a calm biological reaction, but it doesn't matter, it's a biological reaction. Peace of mind is not on that level. So what we often think is that when I'm enlightened, then I will biologically act in a way where I am equanimitous with whatever happens. Biologically, that can't happen. So the peace is not in relation to our biological reaction, but it's in relation to our attitude towards our biological reaction. Peace is not to do with the pleasure or pain we get in life, and in the flow of life, our biological reaction is part of that pleasure and pain flow. So if I see the car and I get angry, that emotion of anger, which is a biological reaction, is painful. It's not as pleasant as some other biological reactions. The fact that my car has been wiped out is also pain. So there is the pain, the financial pain, the inconvenience pain, and the pain of the anger arising. My peace of mind is dependent on my attitude to what is happening in the flow of life, including my attitude to my anger. So let's go back to what is it that I'm really looking for in life, this question. And the answer that is put forward here, which we need to investigate for ourselves, is we are looking for happiness. Every human being in life is looking for happiness. Now, it might sound presumptuous for me to say I know what every human being is looking for. But when we find this out for ourselves and we see the difference between the circumstance in life and outcomes in life, which are pleasure or pain, and understand that on a biological level, everyone has very unique makeup, very unique preferences. So everyone on a biological level is going to prefer different things. That I completely understand. But when we find out what we're really looking for ourselves, it becomes very clear, oh, everyone is looking for this happiness, because the happiness is not a circumstantial happiness. The happiness is a happiness that comes from our attitude to circumstance. And that attitude to circumstance that ends up being what we recognize as my happiness is not the gaining of anything, but the falling away of a certain attitude that delivers an uncomfortableness with oneself. And when we see, yes, everyone is seeking outcomes in life, but they're seeking outcomes because they think the outcomes are going to solve the uncomfortableness with oneself that is present. The uncomfortableness with oneself tells us inside of it, gives us an instruction of what it is that will fix it. As we come to look at this uncomfortableness with oneself a bit more closely, we'll see that that uncomfortableness with oneself is based on a false set of beliefs about who we are. And therefore, the answer that comes out of the uncomfortableness, the answer that says, oh, what you're looking for, what will fix this, is X, Y, and Z. That answer is also an error. You can't trust the answer that is coming out of the uncomfortableness with oneself that is based on an error. We have been trusting it. We've been following it blindly because up to now, let's say, we haven't investigated this particular question closely enough. So we've been following it blindly, thinking that it is good instruction. Each time we follow it, we find, well, sometimes we find we get what we think will solve the problem. And even getting what the uncomfortableness is telling us will be the solution, we find it doesn't satisfy. And yet, even though we have that practical evidence for ourselves, that when we follow the instruction that comes from this uncomfortable feeling, sometimes we get what we're looking for, we get the pleasure we think will satisfy us, it doesn't satisfy us, and even in the face of that evidence, what happens in the next moment is we follow the instruction again from the uncomfortable feeling that says, this will solve the problem. And sometimes we get that. It doesn't satisfy. And what we do in the next moment is we follow the same impulse. And we've been doing this for our whole life. And hopefully at some point awareness will land on this fact and say, actually, I've been trying to get happiness in a particular way. It's never worked. Maybe I've been looking for happiness in the wrong place. If we put this question, if we look at this question, we'll say, yes, everything that I'm doing, I do because I think it will make me happy. But it doesn't. So then we can conclude, maybe I don't know what happiness is because the things that I think will make me happy don't make me happy. So this is a bit of a dilemma. If I'm trying to get the answer to the question, what is it that I'm really looking for? And we realize I clearly have no idea because I've spent my whole life trying to get happiness in a certain place. And it doesn't deliver. So I have to admit that from my own experience, I don't at this moment know what happiness is. Then we can take this investigation, this very practical investigation, and not find ourselves in a dead end as it seems. When we say, well, actually from my experience, I don't know what happiness is. What we can do is we can say, I do know what my unhappiness is. I do have access to know what unhappiness for me is. And how we do that is that in a moment when we can put our hand on our heart and say, in this moment, it's not a concept or a theory that I'm unhappy. I am unhappy. No doubt about it. In this moment, I'm unhappy. And if we investigate what that unhappiness is, we'll find time and time again that that unhappiness is one of these 5 forms of what we can call suffering. Guilt, blame, pride, worry and anxiety, expectation and attachment to outcome. So if we're asking, so remember, this is still all just to get a good answer to this question. What am I really looking for in life? We've come to the conclusion where we say, I thought I knew what happiness is. I've been following an instruction that's been coming from me that says your happiness is to be found there. I put my efforts into achieving what the instruction is telling me. I get the happiness from time to time. I get the outcome that I believe will be my happiness, and it doesn't deliver happiness. And this process repeats itself. So now we're saying, we're admitting, because we're realizing, because we're asking this question and doing a practical investigation, we're admitting something that is important to admit. I have no idea what happiness is. So then we might think, oh, I'm at a dead end. No. Why don't you start looking at what your unhappiness is? That's something you can verify for yourself. How do I know what my unhappiness is? Wait for that time when you can say, in this moment, I'm unhappy. No question about it. And then look at what is going on that is your unhappiness in that moment. And what you'll find is it's one of these 5 forms of suffering: guilt, blame, pride, worry and anxiety, expectation or attachment to outcomes. And now we need to understand what this unhappiness is. It will on the surface appear that your unhappiness is because of the circumstance. It will appear that you are unhappy because of something that someone did that is not in line with your preference. Painful. You will think that you are unhappy because of something you did that didn't deliver a good outcome. That's what it will appear. I'm unhappy because I didn't function in a way that delivered a good outcome. I'm unhappy because the other didn't function in a way that delivered a good outcome. But when we really look at what these different forms of unhappiness are, we will see that it's always our attitude to the circumstance and not the circumstance itself. If we can be seekers, we could be seekers for 10 years, not realize these subtleties that are being pointed out here. And if we don't realize this, we will be seeking without knowing what we're seeking for. Because this investigation is the answer to the question, what am I really looking for? And furthermore, understanding these dynamics becomes the process or method by which certain functions of the body, certain functions of the mind change. Now, the functions I'm talking about that change are not the biological functions, but the psychological functions, the attitude to circumstance. But if we don't realize that the problem, my human unhappiness, is attitudinal, if we don't realize this, what will happen is we'll continue to think it's circumstantial, and we'll continue to insist that circumstance changes. And part of the circumstance is how I function, whether I get angry when I see the car, or whether I, break a lot of things when I'm living life, if I'm clumsy, for example. We will be convinced that my happiness is dependent on my biological reaction changing, on essentially me being a different person. So it's essential to realize my unhappiness is one of these 5 forms of suffering. And it's even more essential to realize that those 5 forms of suffering are always, always, always attitudinal and never, never, never circumstantial. Now, here's another suggestion. The whole thing I've been saying is one big suggestion of what to look at and what to see. The suggestion is human happiness turns out to just be the absence of human unhappiness. Human happiness turns out to be the absence of human unhappiness. So it really means that we are happy when we are not unhappy. Happiness for the human being is peace of mind. Peace of mind is the end of the different forms of our unhappiness. Peace of mind is the end of suffering. Peace of mind is the end of guilt, blame, pride, worry, expectation. Happiness for the human being is peace of mind. Happiness for the human being is the end of suffering. What I am really looking for is happiness. If we do this investigation for ourselves, understanding this is the most important question that we can get an answer to. When I ask you next time, what are you looking for? You'll go, happiness. I say, what's happening? So you say, happiness is not circumstantial. That's what I used to think happiness was. You'll say, happiness is continuous, unbroken peace of mind. And I'll tell you what that continuous, unbroken peace of mind is, you'll tell me. You'll say that continuous, unbroken peace of mind is the end of suffering. And suffering arises in the form of guilt, blame, pride, worry, and expectation. And I've seen that when I look at this guilt, blame, pride, worry, and expectation, I see that it is always my attitude to what is happening in the flow of life. And if you told me that, I'd say, Edith, that is an amazing answer to that very important question. And then you'd probably say to me, it is an amazing answer. And you know what's even more amazing? Is that once I'm really clear on this, that's when my unhappiness started to change. Until I was really clear on this, my unhappiness remained in place because of a misunderstanding whereby I thought my unhappiness was a result of circumstance, instead of the realization that I had when I looked at it closely, that showed me I could remain the most unpleasant person on the planet and still be happy, as long as my attitude towards my unpleasant character was the attitude which we're now going to talk about next, instead of the attitude I used to have towards my unpleasant character. And you'd say to me, you know what? Not that I think you have an unpleasant character, far from it. But let's say you did have a very unpleasant. You would say to me, I thought my happiness would come when one day my unpleasant character changed and I became a pleasant character. And then you'd say, but actually, my unpleasant character I have seen is something that I was born with. And if it's going to change when it's going to change. You know, I know that I would like to have a more pleasant character. I've tried to change it and it doesn't work. Some people have said, I've got a little bit more pleasant as I get older. But that's just something that happened as time went on. It could be the opposite. You could get more unpleasant as you get older. The good news is that our happiness is not dependent on us becoming a perfect human being on the level of our character or on the level of on the biological level. Our happiness is dependent on our attitude to circumstance, which includes our attitude to however we function at any moment. So, if our happiness turns out to be attitudinal and not circumstantial, we need to see what the attitude is that we currently have that creates our unhappiness, and look at the attitude that would need to be there in order for that unhappiness, which is attitudinal, not to happen. The attitude that we currently have that allows these different forms of suffering to arise, guilt, blame, pride, worry, anxiety, expectation and attachment to outcomes, is what we can call the attitude of doership. And underneath the attitude of doership, we can separate it into two sub-attitudes. One is the sub-attitude of doership, under the umbrella of the attitude of doership. And the other is the sub-attitude of attachment to outcomes. So what that attitude of doership and attitude of attachment to outcomes really means is that there is a deeply ingrained belief system, a belief system that we could say is our idea or our belief about who we are. And that belief system says, based on our experience in life. So life has put this belief system in place based on the way that we experience life. And the way we experience life is not really in our control. We pop out of the womb when we're born and we start experiencing life. We were experiencing it life inside the womb as well, but daily life. We pop out and we start feeling cold, we start feeling hot, we start seeing things, we feel hungry. We don't control our experience of life. We don't control what we see. We don't control how we feel about what we see. Not only psychologically, but we don't control the experience that makes us feel like I'm separate from what I see, let's say. So based on our experience in life, a certain belief structure has been put in place. A belief structure that essentially is a belief of who I am and what life is. And the belief structure includes some very specific beliefs that are important to look at in relation to this attitude to the flow of life. So let's look at the attitude of personal doership. The belief there says, I am, Roger is, so my identity, you can see this is my identity because the belief says, Roger is the person. So far there's no problem. Yes, Roger is the person. This is where the problem comes in. Roger is the person who is in complete control of everything that he thinks, everything that he says, everything that he does. Essentially, the belief is Roger is an independent entity in complete control of everything that happens through him. That is a deeply, 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 deeply ingrained belief that when it functions means it doesn't function whereby we know it's a belief. It functions whereby it feels like this is what I am. And our attitude to the flow of life is based on this deeply ingrained belief that Roger is a person with complete control over what he does next. And because that is the deeply ingrained belief about what I am, then that belief system extends out towards a belief about the other. So the belief in personal doership doesn't only see myself as a separate independent entity in complete control of everything that I think, say and do, but it sees the other as the same, a separate independent entity, a person, with complete control over the way that they function. Now, it's as simple as that. With that belief in place, when I function according to my makeup, and let's say I have a terrible character, and my functioning in life is according to my makeup, my character, then, and I shout at people, and I get angry, and I fail at getting good results. With this ingrained belief, my attitude towards myself is one of personal doership, and I feel shame. I feel guilt. I have to feel guilt with this belief in place. Because then I'll say, why are you not performing better? You're in control of everything you do. Why aren't you performing better? And then furthermore, what happens in life is the other person has exactly the same belief in personal doership. And so when you get angry with them or you break something by mistake, you function and you don't get good results, the other tells you, why are you so incompetent? And when someone tells us this, because we believe we are the doer, we see that our actions have created pain for the other responds to the situation or reacts to the situation and tells us that we are incompetent. And we already believe that. As the doer, we say, why am I not better? So we hate ourselves. When there is the belief in personal doership, we hate ourselves for everything that happens through us that is not perfect. Then the other tells us we're not perfect, and it just reminds us of our hatred for ourselves. And that means that we react to those things, we react attitudinally to those things that happen through the body that are not great, so painful outcomes, painful to myself or painful to the other. We react to them as though I am the doer, I should have acted differently, and we feel guilt, shame, insecurity, worthlessness. When the other does something that delivers pain to us, we look at them in the same way as we look at ourselves, separate, independent doer, and we blame them, saying, you should have done that differently. You could have done it differently. You hurt me. What you did delivered pain to me. It wasn't what I wanted. You said you would pick me up at 12 o'clock from the airport, and you didn't. You left me waiting. That is pain for me. You did that to me. You delivered the pain. And I see you as the doer that could have done it differently, so I hate you. And that becomes the blame towards the other, which is attitudinal. Just like the blame towards ourself, which is shame, is attitudinal towards how we function. Now, this attitude of guilt and blame we could call a psychological reaction rather than a biological reaction. The biological reaction is walking along, so the walking is biological. We might be singing a song, that's biological. We come up to our car that has been wiped out by a truck while it's parked in the car park. We feel all shaken and we swear loudly. We scream. Ah! Biological. All of that so far is biological. Our attitude towards how we react, where we say, oh, I shouldn't react like this, that's our psychological reaction. That's our attitude to how we have biologically reacted. So we can call our suffering a psychological reaction. We can call the pain in the flow of life a biological reaction. Either pain because of something that happened outside of us, that impacted us, affected our, or was out of line with our preferences, and so we can call that pain. So that's biological. The biological reaction we have can be painful. Anger, if anger arises, it's painful. And that's part of the flow of life, pain. And our attitude is our relationship to that, how we interpret that. If we have this deeply ingrained belief in personal doership, we're going to judge ourselves. Or, well, we'll either judge ourselves as having acted appropriately, or we'll judge ourselves as having acted inappropriately. If we come across our car and biologically we find ourselves reacting calmly, oh, someone must have come along, smashed my car, I'll deal with it. That's a biological reaction. And we'll say, if the belief in personal doership is in place, we'll say, oh, I acted very well in that circumstance. That's pride. It's a psychological reaction to the fact that we acted calmly. If we act like a maniac, afterwards we will judge ourselves and say, wow, you really acted like a maniac, and that wasn't the right way to go. You're a failure. Now, imagine with this deeply ingrained belief of personal doership, what your attitude is going to be towards the truck driver. With the belief he is the doer, now you have to hate him for the pain that he has caused you. So the attitude that we would have towards the other will be of blame, and that is a story that can carry on for years, maybe our whole life. An attitude of hating the other for what happened through them at a particular point in time. So the biological reaction is vertical. When the situation happens, there is a biological reaction. The attitudinal reaction, which we could call a psychological reaction, is horizontal and extends in time. The circumstance is finished. And yet, our attitude to it is one of blaming them for having hit our car and driven off, maybe. So that's the attitude we have that allows our unhappiness to arise. The belief in personal doership. The other part of that belief system is the belief that my happiness is to be found in outcomes. My happiness is to be found in the flow of life. So with the deeply ingrained belief that my happiness is to be found in outcomes, when we see our car, we see that that is a bad outcome. We believe that that bad outcome, which is pain in the moment, is an attack on who I am, because the belief of who I am, the false self-image, this we'll find out is a false self-image. The belief says my completeness, my happiness, my okayness is dependent on outcomes. So when we see the car, which is a bad outcome, internally we feel like we have been attacked by life. Not only by life, but by the driver, for what he did that delivered this outcome. When we act according to our character, if our character is to get angry at the things people have done, biologically, we come home and we see that toys are on the floor and we get angry. We then, that is pain in the moment, with the belief that my completeness is to be found in outcomes. My completeness is essentially to be found in life being pleasure, 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 pleasure. We judge ourselves. We feel that that pain that arose is an attack on my completeness. We judge the person that left the toys on the floor because that's pain for us. And we believe that my completeness is dependent on pleasure. Now, this attitude of doership and attachment to outcome, if it was true, if it was accurate, then we'd do this assessment and we'd say, actually, unhappiness is a fact of life. If we really were the doer and the other was the doer, and if our happiness really was dependent on outcomes, we investigate life and we find that these attitudes, the beliefs of doership and the belief in the thing are accurate. If we do that investigation, we have to say, actually my happiness as peace of mind is not available. Because unhappiness makes sense. Unhappiness is a logical reaction to life. If, however, we do an investigation and we find that upon close examination, we find what happens through me is not in my control. What happens through the other is not in their control. And furthermore, if we start to experience, as a result of this now more focused investigation, we start to experience moments where we find we are happy even when circumstance is painful. We then see the belief that my happiness is dependent on outcomes is not entirely true. We start having evidence to the contrary. What I mean by evidence to the contrary is if we find that there is pain in the moment. Someone has left the toys on the floor. Anger arises, which is a biological reaction. More pain in the moment. And yet, something inside of us now realizes that all of that is a happening based on my makeup, that the biological reaction is pain, but we realize that my happiness is about having an attitude that sees it for what it is. And if this is the case, what we start to find is that yes, there is moments of pain, and yet no uncomfortableness with the pain. No uncomfortableness in the form of guilt or blame or pride. No uncomfortableness in the form of expectation and attachment to outcomes. So then we start to see experientially for myself, my happiness, my completeness is not actually dependent on circumstance, on outcomes, but on my attitude. And if that attitude starts to, the attitude of attachment dissolves, we find, I'm happy even in the face of pain. Now that's completely different to the belief that I'm saying is in place. The beliefs at the bottom of the attitude that is currently in place that creates our unhappiness, which, as I've said, is all attitudinal. The beliefs are, I am the doer, the other is the doer, and my happiness is completely dependent on outcomes. So an investigation into why I am not the doer and the other is not the doer is important, because we'll find on investigation that those beliefs are not true, and an investigation into whether my happiness is to be found in outcomes is also very important, because we investigate it and we'll find why it's not true. So here are the basis. I'm going to put forward concepts, pointers, hints, that will be the basis of the investigation. How the human being acts in any moment, both biologically and psychologically, both biologically and attitudinally, is a result of their makeup in that particular moment. And when we look at the human's makeup on a biological and psychological level, it is based on two factors: the genetic structure of the human being and the accumulation of life impacting us moment after moment after moment. So we can call life impacting us in each moment new conditioning, and the accumulation of the new conditioning in each moment we can call our up-to-date conditioning. And a large part of the conditioning that life delivers in life is conditioning from society, conditioning from the family, from our school, the culture and political environment that we grow up in, and the religious culture or religion. So, the makeup of the human being in each moment is a result of the genetic structure and the up-to-date conditioning, which is continually affected by new conditioning in each moment. New conditioning will either reinforce the up-to-date conditioning, or it can radically change it. These two factors have never been in our control. We didn't choose our genetic structure, and we don't choose how life impacts us moment after moment. We didn't choose the family we were born into. We couldn't control what beliefs and what ideologies our parents have and our siblings. We don't control the society we were born into and what beliefs and ideologies that society has. We don't control which school we go to, or which friends, which people are in the class that we're exposed to, and what friends we make. All of this happens moment after moment after moment. And so the genes are not in our control, and the up-to-date conditioning are not in our control. So when we look at ourselves objectively, we find, wow, I am an instrument, a biological instrument, a very complex robot, you could say. And life has formed me to be this way. Now, we might not like how life has formed us. We might be able to admit, by seeing the outputs of this biological instrument, we could say, I'm not the most pleasant biological instrument. The outputs are not the most pleasant. I have my good points and my bad points. That would be a more accurate way of looking at it. Everyone has their good points and their bad points. Some people have much more bad points than good points, and some people have much more good points than bad points. But essentially, no one is a perfect human being. The important part is to look at this and say, look at it objectively and say, I am as I am, my good points and my bad points, and I don't control how I am. Life has determined that. Life has dictated that. And so, in each moment, the human being is one way. That way is according to life, and will respond to the unique circumstance it finds itself in each moment, one way. That one way is a result of the circumstance and its unique makeup. All factors that the person has never been in control of. So how the person functions in each moment, completely not in their control. Humans are like a complex chemical. If you put a chemical with another chemical, there will be a reaction. What the reaction is, not in the chemical's control. It is impersonal. The chemical has a particular composition. Put it in contact with another with an environment or another chemical, and there'll be a response or a reaction. And it's impersonal. The chemical doesn't sit down and have a conference with the other chemical and decide how they're going to react. The chemical doesn't say, okay, in this moment, I want you to react in an explosive way, or I want you to react in an inert way. No, a reaction happens based on the chemical and its makeup and the environment it finds itself in. And that's the same for human beings. We are the way we are, and the functioning, the thinking, the emotions, the behaviors are a result of the makeup. They're not the result of a doer, not the result of some fictitious character that is believed to exist, that is in control of the steering wheel. That's a fiction. That is the belief in a doer. And the belief in personal doership is part of our genes and up-to-date conditioning that life has put in place. So life has put in place the attitude of doership, and so we are forced to act and react the way we do. So if shame comes up, shame, which is an attitude of doership towards what happened through us biologically. Shame is also not our doing. So no need to feel guilty about feeling guilty. And if we blame the other, the blame is suffering. It is an uncomfortableness with the other, ultimately an uncomfortableness with oneself. But if we see that that blame is part of our makeup, based on our genes and up-to-date conditioning, then that blame is also just a happening. So no need to feel guilty about blaming the other. Now someone would say, it's all well and good you say that we are the way we are, but we can change. I say, well, I agree, change can happen. Someone could hear, you are the way you are, and that's it. You will function according to the way you are. And the internal reaction, the thinking process, which is a result of the genes and up-to-date conditioning and the circumstance, and in the circumstance there is the description that you are the way you are, the internal thinking might be, oh well, nothing for me to do. And that thinking could turn into thinking that blocks future change happening. But if that happens, that's life creating that reaction to these words. Now, someone might hear this, and the thought process in their head go, no, this isn't helpful to tell someone, because the fact is that we can change. In the next moment, we can change. And what you're saying is, too bad, this is the way it is. And I say, well, no, not exactly. I'm saying that the description is saying that in each moment we are the way we are. I'm not saying that change can't happen in the next moment. It can. And I wouldn't want this belief or this concept to be turned into a belief where someone then assumes that positive change or negative change can't happen. But if we look at the descriptions, we'll see that the description says that our up-to-date conditioning is going to change according to new conditioning that comes in. And so the person that has an objection with what I'm saying might say, no, I'm going to tell this person that you can change, you just need to do this, this and this different. And if you do this, this and this different, then the outcome might actually be much better. So, for example, if someone complains about anger issues, instead of telling them that your anger is a result of your genes and up-to-date conditioning, the way you are in that moment, instead of saying that, why don't you tell them that they can change? Why don't you tell them that when they're in a painful situation and they feel anger about to explode, why don't you tell them to count to 10? To count to 10 and breathe deeply. Because that has an effect on the anger. And I'd say, that's great. We can deal with anger if someone sees that they are designed in a way that they get angry. Let's first acknowledge that that is a result of their genes and up-to-date conditioning at that point in time. And anger is what tends to happen. Now, you're an anger management expert. I'm just describing the dynamics of life. And the fact is that in that moment, their anger arises because of their genes and up-to-date conditioning, two factors that no one has ever been in control of. These two factors plus the circumstance they find themselves in. Now, that is very, very important information because it's accurate and it goes directly to the cause of our unhappiness. It goes directly to undoing the belief in personal doership. What the anger management person might not be realizing is that what we're really looking for is not to become a better human being. not to become a human being that doesn't get angry. That's what we think we're looking for. Remember, what we're really looking for is happiness, and happiness is the ending of unhappiness. And unhappiness is based on the belief in personal doership. So, let's deal with that problem. Then, if the person finds themselves in life being exposed to new conditioning from the anger management expert, that can happen. I'd have no problem with that. I wouldn't tell the person, don't waste your time. I would say, if you find yourself being exposed to the anger management man's intelligence and understanding of how anger works, then that is life delivering new conditioning. And that new conditioning can affect your up-to-date conditioning. The outcome is not in our control. We don't know how the new conditioning is going to affect us, and we don't know what the outcome is going to be. It could turn out to be a very important bit of new conditioning for your anger. But let's realize your anger is on the level of your biological reaction. Your anger is on the level of pleasure and pain. So why not? If we can improve, or if life improves things on a level of pleasure and pain, that's great. We have more pleasure and less pain. However, let's not mistake that for our happiness. Let's understand that that is life delivering new conditioning, which means that in the next moment we are still one way. We are the way we are in that moment based on our genes and up-to-date conditioning. We will function exactly according to that one way we are in that moment, which means even after the new conditioning we might find ourselves getting angry, as we always have, or after the new conditioning we might find a situation that would normally make us angry not make us angry. What is important is not whether we get angry or not angry. That is pleasure or pain. What is important to our happiness is our attitude towards whether we get angry, or our attitude towards whether we don't get angry. If we find ourselves not getting angry, and then our attitude is, look at what I have achieved. I now don't get angry. What has happened is life has changed us so that there is less pain in our life, but more suffering in the form of pride. And that suffering in the form of pride, which pride is one of the milder forms of suffering, but nonetheless suffering, what we'll find is that that has solidified our belief in personal doership, and that belief in personal doership will be in the system ready to judge and blame someone who delivers pain to us, and ready to judge and blame myself when, in the flow of life, I don't function in the same positive way as I'm functioning in the moment when I didn't get angry. And so what might happen is we improve life on a biological level, because actually life has improved it by delivering new conditioning, but our attitude hasn't changed. Our attitude of seeing ourselves not as the doer hasn't changed, and now we will feel pride, which is based on the false belief I'm the doer, instead of recognizing that life just delivered new conditioning that did or didn't have an effect on my biological reaction. So these concepts are new conditioning being delivered by life. The effect that they have on our genes and up-to-date conditioning is not in our control. But what the potential is that it has the effect of changing our up-to-date conditioning on the level of our attitude, meaning has the potential for changing our up-to-date conditioning on the level of the belief of personal doership and attachment to outcome. And although it's not in our control, if this new conditioning does start to change our up-to-date conditioning on the level of these beliefs, what we will see is that our reaction to life in the future will be based on our existing up-to-date conditioning, which is now different to what it used to be, because life has started to change it. And we might find that life on a biological level, life on the circumstantial level, will continue to unfold more or less as it did before. But our attitude to the flow of life might change radically. We might find that we no longer have an attitude that arises automatically based on the belief in doership and attachment to outcome, and we find ourselves reacting differently. Now that reaction, that different reaction, is not based on the belief that I am not the doer. It is not based on the belief that my happiness is not to be found in outcomes. But rather, what this process does is it dissolves the false belief that I am the doer and the false belief that my happiness is to be found in outcomes. And then even the teaching itself, even the concept that shows us you are not the doer, your happiness is not to be found in outcomes, even that concept dissolves, and we find ourselves reacting in a way that is very different to before, meaning the absence of the reaction of doership. So then we find that there is a witnessing of the flow of life, a witnessing of the biological reactions happening, and that witnessing is not a belief system. That witnessing is the natural attitude of the heart, the natural attitude of the human being without the belief in personal doership. So it turns out that our happiness is not a new belief system. We can say our attitude was based on a false belief system. So our suffering in the past was based on a false belief system, and it was an attitude which is a mentation, a mental movement. So our shame is essentially a thought, oh, I am not good enough, I am a failure. And in its condensed form, that thought, I am a failure, is a feeling. So our old attitude of suffering is based on a belief, and it was a mentation, it was a mental movement, or a feeling of shame, blame, pride. It turns out that our happiness is not a mentation. It's not a mental activity. It is the absence of the old mental activity and the presence of presence. The presence of the human being, the aspect of the human being that simply doesn't react to the flow of life in the way it used to. The absence of the old reaction to the flow of life. So the human being without the belief in doership and attachment to outcomes is still biological on the biological level, will still biologically react to the flow of life. In fact, the biological reaction, we could say, is part of the flow of life. Someone pushes the body and it can be painful. You could be pushed and it's painful, and you could bump into the wall and it's painful. That is pain in the moment. And the body reacts internally, the pain, the pressure of the wall, that is a biological reaction. And then the body can push back. That too is a biological reaction. That's going to continue to happen. But now the old attitude that would blame the other for pushing me and then feel guilt for the fact that I pushed back, thinking, oh, I shouldn't have pushed back. That old attitude is gone, and the new attitude will be one of understanding that this is life unfolding exactly as it's destined to unfold, that it was destiny for the other in this circumstance based on their genes and up-to-date conditioning to push me. It was my destiny to be pushed and feel the pain. And it was destiny for the body to push back as a biological reaction given the circumstance, and on it goes, on life goes, but without the old attitude of blaming the other and feeling guilt.
But that's also a belief. That's also a belief.
This is what I'm saying, is that the new attitude has come to see life as a happening, not as a belief. The belief in personal doership is, when we investigate it, not supported by an investigation of life. When we investigate the belief in personal doership, which says, in each moment I'm completely in control of everything that happens through me. We investigate it and we say, no, it's not true.
Yeah. But the following of what you say, for me it's like a belief.
Yes, if we end up just having this as a, where we hear the concepts and we take it on as a belief, where we say, oh, this was a happening, it was destined for that person to push me, and destined for me to feel pain, and destined for me to push back, then that's not peace of mind. That is a new belief that is essentially covering up the suffering that will be arising inside. When this is really seen, when the dynamics of life are really seen, not believed, but you have to investigate it for yourself. And so a suggestion Ramesh used to put forward is, this investigation can take the form of a little exercise you do once a day, until you become absolutely convinced, based on your own investigation, that you are not the doer and the other is not the doer. So he said, sit quietly at the end of the day, take one event during the day that you are convinced is your doing, a lot of other events you're not sure, but one event that you are sure is your doing, and then investigate it. And on investigating it, you'll find that you saw something, heard something, smelt something, tasted something, or touched something in your environment that you weren't in control of. So you weren't in control of the fact that you smelt the smell of smoke. The smoke was in the environment and the smelling happened. So that was something you weren't in control of. And then as a result of smelling something, or seeing something, or hearing something, that was part of the environment that you weren't in control of, a reaction happened, a subsequent, so that was the cause, the smelling was the cause. So originally the smoke is the cause and the smelling is the effect. Now the effect becomes the new cause. You have smelt something, and the next effect is the functioning in the body. A thought might arise saying, where's that smoke coming from? There shouldn't be smoke. Now that thought, when we investigate it, is a thought based on your genes and up-to-date conditioning, based on how you are in that moment. So if we use the example of someone who is mentally handicapped, meaning different genes and up-to-date conditioning, they may smell the smoke, and the reaction in their brain might not be the thought that says, where's this smoke coming from? That smoke shouldn't be there. Their brain might not be developed sufficiently to understand that smoke is not normal in this environment. In your situation, a reaction is going to happen, and the reaction could be a thought. Now you're not in control of the thought. You weren't in control of the smoke. You weren't in control of the fact that you smelt it, and you're not in control of the thought that arises. The thought arises based on your genes and up-to-date conditioning, factors you were never in control of, and the circumstance you're in, also not something you're in control of. Following that thought, which was an effect of a previous cause, that thought now becomes the new cause of a next effect. the next effect might be to get up quickly and see what the smoke, where the smoke is coming from. And so that getting up quickly, which we are convinced is my doing, turns out to be a happening, just like the thought which we're convinced is my doing, turns out to be a happening based on the circumstance and your genes and up-to-date conditioning. Everything we believe is my doing turns out, upon investigation, to be a happening, not my doing. So we stand up quickly, we see, once again, we see something, we hear something, we smell something, we see a fire in the rubbish bin. And automatically, so all of this happens very quickly, the effect becomes the cause of the next effect. We see the fire in the fire bin, and a thought is, put it out. The thought arises, put it out. And then we see a vase with flowers in it, and we throw that on the fire. And we are convinced this is my doing. Then your brother comes in and says, "What are you doing? That's my ritual. Why are you throwing water on my ritual?" And you say, "Your ritual? What do you mean your ritual?" And then you realize what's happened. And he said, "And that's my favorite flowers. I picked them today. And now you've ruined it all." And we're convinced, I ruined it all my doing. But on investigation, once again, we see that we saw something, we heard something, we smelt something in a circumstance that we weren't in control of. And then a series of reactions happen. And it's always a continuation of this same principle. So then we end up concluding, wow, what I thought was my doing is a happening and couldn't have happened any other way. It would have happened differently if the circumstance was different, if my genes and up-to-date conditioning were different. If my genes and up-to-date conditioning were different, I might have realized that that was a ritual. But I've never been exposed to my brother doing that burning ritual, and so I didn't know it was a ritual. As a result of that experience, which is new conditioning in life, next time I smell smoke, the thought might arise, that could be my brother doing his ritual, but I'll go and check anyway. And we see the fire in the same bin, and we see my brother sitting there, looking at the thing, and we go, that's a ritual. Because our genes and up-to-date conditioning are different. So this is investigation we can do day after day after day. And we'll find that whenever we investigate anything that we believe is my doing, if we follow these principles, we'll come up with the conclusion, not my doing, but a happening. And at the end of a month of finding time and time again that what seems like my doing is a happening, we'll then have our own evidence, not a belief, but our own evidence, whereby we say, I cannot believe anymore that what happens in each moment is my doing. I completely see from my own investigation that it's all a happening. Sometimes positive outcomes, sometimes negative outcomes. The outcomes not in my control. The actions not in my control. And so then, when life happens, the old attitude of doership has dissolved, so we can't feel guilt. We can admit that the outcome is not great. I threw the flowers away. I ruined the ritual. Not a great outcome. But guilt, thinking that I am a failure and I should have done it differently, doesn't arise, because the dynamics of life are clearly seen. And so then what we find is we don't even end up with the story that this was a result of my genes and up-to-date conditioning. That story is useful while we are still in the process of dissolving the old beliefs in doership. And at some point, after having lived life, seeing it like this day after day after day, because as we then live life with this deep understanding, every time we look at life, we see it as this impersonal happening. We see someone getting angry and we think, of course, they're in a circumstance that is not in line with their preferences, and as a result of their genes and up-to-date conditioning, anger is arising. So we might be sitting at the coffee shop looking at all of these people interacting differently. Someone getting angry with the waitress for having spilt over their drink. Or angry, and we see it and we go, oh look, it's a happening according to their genes and up-to-date conditioning. And eventually we see life like this. We don't need a commentary about it anymore. So then we see anger arising in me from time to time, and there is a silence, not a belief, but a natural silence about the anger. So the anger is loud, but the judgment about the anger is not there. Instead, there is a silence. And that silence is what you could call the witnessing. That silence is the peace. And if we find ourselves in a situation that is very unfortunate, let's say that we find ourselves in prison because of something that has happened. Let's say we are even wrongly accused. This that has been explained this morning is really saying that our happiness is not circumstantial. Our happiness is all attitudinal. And if we accept that life is unfolding according to a source or a force that I am part of the unfolding story of life. I am not the creator. I am part of the unfolding story of life. And that however life unfolds is determined by this moving force. Life and the force are one. Then we might be able to find ourselves in unfortunate circumstance, in prison, for example, but without the attitude of guilt and shame, without the attitude of blame and hatred towards those people that have wrongly accused us, without the attitude that says my happiness is to be found in me being physically free. This attitude that is available even in an unfortunate circumstance like being in prison, where undoubtedly the circumstance is going to be far more painful on a circumstantial level than being in daily life where you are free. With the right attitude, we will be able to be completely happy even in painful circumstance. So Nelson Mandela, wise as he was, when he was leaving the gates of the prison, he quoted that he realized that if he left the gates and still harbored resentment and hatred for those people that imprisoned him for that many years, he would still be in prison. So what he was referring to is an attitudinal prison. The fact that he was physically free wouldn't mean very much on an attitudinal level if he still hated his jailers. And similarly, he could find himself with that attitude inside the prison and be free on an attitudinal level. And that freedom from guilt, blame, pride, worry and expectation turns out to be human happiness. It turns out to be human happiness which we come to know for ourselves, because it does more than just leave us free of suffering, but it allows a recognition of the essence of the human being to be seen. And it's a combination of the essence of the human being, which is there, it's the same for everyone. The essential, that's essence, the essential nature of the human being is not biological or psychological, is not dependent on genes and up-to-date condition. The essence of the human being is something outside of that flow. It's the consciousness that functions through the body. And it's unchanging, it is free of personality, free of characteristics. If we are going to label it as anything, we would label it as the function, where we could call it consciousness. And I would say that its two basic functions are awareness and the sense of existence. And when this suffering quietens down, meaning the attitude of doership starts to dissolve, and the attitude of attachment to outcomes starts to dissolve, we end up with this silent space that witnesses life. And in that space there is a recognition of these two functionings, the function of awareness, the function of the sense of existence, that become known to be the core of the human being. And we find that our happiness is a combination of the absence of suffering, the absence of unhappiness, and the recognition of our presence, the recognition of the very core of what the human being is. And then we find that as we rest there, there is a sense that I am, I exist, an undeniable sense that whatever is happening in circumstance, whatever the daily life situation is, I exist. And once awareness has landed on itself, awareness has landed on the sense of existence, something amazing is revealed. That amazing thing is that there is a self-contentedness, which is this peace, an okayness, a sense of fullness, which, being careful of the words, can sound like a feeling, but actually it's a very subtle sense of contentment or peace that, if we want to describe it most accurately, we would say it is the absence of suffering and the presence of presence. The presence of presence doesn't imply something impersonal, it just means the sense I, as a human being, exists, the recognition I exist, I am. And in the absence of suffering, we find that that is more than enough. The fear of death falls away because of something very interesting. This peace with just being in this moment means that there isn't the need to be happy in the next moment. The happiness is available in this moment. Therefore, the belief that my happiness is to be found in outcomes in the future falls away based on our own experience of being happy now. And then when death is imminent, there is no fear that I won't have happiness in the future, because in each moment there is happiness now. And the mind won't understand this. The mind will say, yes, but I need to know that I am going to be here indefinitely. And the unexplainable mystery is that our own presence is more than happy with the fact that it exists now. More than happy meaning it doesn't require any more happiness as a result of knowing that it is going to exist in the next moment.
And the sense of the sense of the existence could be there only if there is no doership anymore.
If that's right, if the doership is present, the doership is continually looking outward at what the other is doing, looking outward at what I have done, looking outward at outcomes that it thinks is going to satisfy. And that movement, that mental movement, is very effective at covering up the very subtle essence, core of the human being. As that movement, mental movement, starts to quieten down, and it quietens down when the beliefs in doership and attachment start to get weaker and weaker, then the essence starts to become more and more recognized. the stillness starts to become more and more recognized.
So it's a mistake to seek this presence.
Yes. Once we become clear, this is why there are so many conceptual descriptions. Usually conceptual descriptions will make the seeking element of us seek even more. And for a while, we might find that happening with these descriptions. There are a whole lot of descriptions here, and the doership says, okay, now, thanks for the information, now I'm going to make this happen. As we listen to the descriptions, and we understand the different forms of suffering, and we understand that those different forms of suffering are the veil, when we realize that the seeking itself is a form of attachment to outcome in the future, the seeking itself is confirming that I am not complete now, that I need something in the future, then the working mind, which is the part of the mind that is functional and doesn't create suffering, the working mind will realize when the thinking mind, which is the part of the mind where the doership beliefs are, the working mind will realize what is going on. It will catch it, it will see it, just like you just said. You concluded, in that case, the seeking itself, which is based on the belief in doership, is the problem, is an obstacle. And when that's recognized, then the seeking itself will be seen to be a form of doership, and it will start to slow down. And in exchange, we find ourselves more and more connected to this sense of I, more and more receiving confirmation that my happiness is to be found inside and not outside. The more we get this confirmation, the less and less sense it makes for the old thinking to happen, because the old thinking was based on the non-recognition that my happiness is something very simple. It's the ending of seeking. And so previously it really was the dog chasing its tail. It was a snowball effect where the seeking thought that it was responsible for finding happiness. And the more that it thinks it's responsible for finding happiness, the more that the seeking will function. The more the seeking functions, which is the doer functioning, the more that this I am is veiled. And so it's slowly, as we're exposed to the concepts more and more, and as awareness and the intellect starts to hear what the concepts are saying, see for ourselves and feel when suffering is arising. And suffering is, as we start to look at it, as we start to look at our unhappiness, we'll realize that all of these forms of suffering are an uncomfortableness with oneself. And so as we become more and more familiar with the terrain, we sort of then understand what the problem is. And so becoming familiar with the terrain ultimately means being completely willing to just stop. Because familiar with the terrain means that we recognize that not stopping is more suffering. So then when we see seeking happening, the working mind kicks up and says, stop. The stop of the working mind that has become really expert at seeing everything clearly, the stop is like a bookend to the thinking mind. It's a full stop. So it's not a thought that arises that says, you really should stop. This is just more suffering. That's probably more suffering. More of the doer trying to... The stop of the working mind is a recognition of what suffering is, seeing it, seeing that it's the thinking mind trying to find an answer, and it says stop. Like, stop. And then the thinking mind will say, but, you stop. But it can't be, stop. But stop. And then the mind might actually see, awareness and the intellect might see that there is this way of being in life which doesn't require the mind continually functioning in order for life experience to happen. The mind has been working obsessively trying to get something for its whole life, and it doesn't realize that there is a stop. What is this space that is aware without thinking? And let's also be clear, the thinking is being separated into the thinking mind and the working mind. That the working mind is the functional aspect of thinking, the aspect that says, how much money do I need to take on holiday? What time should I get the taxi to pick me up in order to get to the airport on time? That thinking has nothing to do with the belief in personal doership or attachment to outcome. That is functional. And that thinking in time will come back and not disturb our peace of mind. It will be seen as part of the functioning of the biology on the level of the flow of life. And it isn't the thinking that causes or that is our unhappiness. So this distinction between the working mind and the thinking mind is very important, because otherwise we might assume that thinking needs to stop altogether. And the fact is, if thinking stopped altogether, we wouldn't be able to move. Thinking is a very important part of our functionality in daily life. So when I am talking about this stop, it's really a phase that happens where we're coming to see that the thinking mind, which is continually judging and commenting, has been for our whole life, can be shut off, and there can still be an experience of life. That is the field that Rumi pointed to. There is a field beyond the ideas of right doing and wrong doing. I'll meet you there. That's where people can meet, where there isn't the continual chatter of judgment, blame, shame, doership. You know, you did this right, you did this wrong. There is a field beyond the ideas of right doing and wrong doing. That means when the belief in doership has dissolved, the belief that my happiness is to be found in outcomes has dissolved, we find ourselves able to witness life as a happening and even participate in life biologically. We will still, on a biological level, be completely in the flow of life, but without this attitude of completely judging everything as appropriate or inappropriate on a level of the doer. And so the stop is about becoming aware for the first time and then settling into or understanding that the mechanism of us dropping into this field of being is a movement in the completely different, a movement of mind in the completely different direction that has become so habituated. The movement of mind is to say, but I need to solve this and to think and more, and how can I do this? How do I do that? I need to find an answer. And it goes on 24 hours a day, or as long as we're awake. It's always functioning. And when you realize that that is suffering, stop. Then we found the field. Oh, there's a field beyond the ideas of right doing and wrong doing. The poem goes on to, I don't know the poem off by heart, but it says, when the soul lies down in the grass of that field, life is so full that I think nothing needs to be said. So the grass of that field is this presence of presence I was talking about, where awareness becomes aware of the sense of existence, the human's very essence, the core of the human. And so when awareness rests in itself, so this is the I that is the existence, the sense of being that is self-contenting and is happy that it exists, is happy that it exists now. That is the fullness that Rumi is talking about, that we recognize, that requires us not to look into the future, not even to say anything. We just, I am.